Rain, on a bloody night, that's what soothes after a hard battle. Hundreds of bodies lie on the floor. There are cold bodies in the blood that will never be inhaled or exhaled again. Their story ended on this battlefield. Only one warrior remained in the field. Kneeling around 100 bodies, the unknown swordsman takes a breath. Breathing a little, he looks at the floor and thinks, was it all worth it? Could all these losses have been avoided? Many people died in this battle. Young and adults. Commanders and ordinary warriors. Deciding to look back, the guy looked up. The swordsman himself was lucky during the battle, and he did not receive much damage. Before him is a terrible picture. Hundreds of people lie on the floor. Each of them died a terrible death. The swordsman cannot find words to describe his feelings. Unexpectedly for him, his stream of thoughts is interrupted by some words that come from behind him. The guy turns around in bewilderment, hoping to see one of his brothers. Something with a pale face continues to speak. From his words, it becomes clear that he admires the strength of the swordsman. Disgust and anger can be seen in the eyes of the guy. How can this something still be alive? The guy stands on the exhausted giant. He is literally 4 times the size of a swordsman. Who is this? Why, despite all the injuries, can he still speak? Giant Agayat, a kind of deity that has horns and wings. He exudes greatness. 20 days ago, he suddenly appeared in the empire. After his appearance, life for people was not the same. He began to wreak havoc with his harbingers, who were happy to destroy everything in their path. Agayat was the last of the 3 giants. The swordsman, with all his hatred, steps on the face of the giant. He starts a dialogue with him. He wants to know why he is still alive, because looking at his deeds, he should have been underground for a long time. Agayat assures him that he has little left, and he will soon return to his side. Undoubtedly, the guy is glad to hear this, because giants are certainly not needed on Earth. Let him go to the others. The giant pretends not to understand who he is talking about. Of course, the swordsman talks about the other 2 giants that wreaked havoc with Agayat, and he happily tells what happened to them. One of them was completely fried by a hot-tempered red dragon. The second one, for eternity, was locked up by an old man named Lorcan. Taunting the giant, the guy asks if everything is clear to him now. Agayat, one way or another, continues to talk and admire the strength of this swordsman. Children of stars share these feelings among themselves. The children of the stars also took their enemies with them into the world. All this time the guy stands and does not interrupt the monologue of the giant. Agayat says that there are no more strong people on Earth because of the children of the stars. But how can they not exist if the swordsman is still alive? If he is still breathing air? The giant says that the guy doesn't really have much time left. He is very happy about this, but what about the swordsman? Pressing his foot on the giant's head, the swordsman continues to listen in confusion. If he had realized his strength earlier and began to hone them, he would have become a big obstacle on the way to their cherished desire. Through gritted teeth, the swordsman asks what the giant is talking about. Having calmed down a little, the swordsman says that he doesn't care and somehow he lost his life. He was glad to end the giant. The giant is still surprised by the strength and courage of the protagonist. The swordsman is a great man, so he has a right to be proud. Holding the sword tightly in his hand, the guy tries not to swing it past the giant's neck. Barely breathing, he continues to listen to Agayat, who says that his world will soon be swallowed up by the starlight one way or another, after which the world will dissolve into it. Before he could finish the monologue, the swordsman still delivers the final blow and finishes off the giant. From such a strong and masterful blow, the giant's head flew off his shoulders. And again silence. Only the rain does not allow me to completely immerse myself in my thoughts and forget. The swordsman exhales calmly. Finally, it's all over. But how should he change what has already been done? What was the giant talking about? The main character finally rises, becoming in a pool of blood. In the blood of hundreds of people after a fierce battle. Every breath of air is hard for a guy. He looks around in the hope of seeing or hearing at least someone. Looking around a little, he still gets into his memories. These are the very memories where all those with whom he fought shoulder to shoulder are still alive. He remembers the old camp. Old acquaintances, who at that time still calmly talked about nothing. The guy also remembers a person very dear to him, whom he will never be able to forget. This is his best friend. They had known each other since childhood. He recalls the carefree time they didn't spend together. The fights they fought together, and of course he remembers their last fight. In the memories themselves, the guy is much better, because the cruel reality was returning. He sees a cruel picture in front of him. He does not believe in that, but most likely, he simply refuses to believe in it. Everyone is here, all his companions, acquaintances, and his best friend. Dozens of people who will never get back on their feet. Somehow, they fought for their pride to the death. But, unfortunately, they were not as strong as a swordsman. It was precisely necessary to assess the situation and escape from the battlefield as soon as possible. They could have avoided all the losses, but, unfortunately, they are all no more. The protagonist cannot come to terms with the death of his comrades in any way, saying that as they were frivolous, they remained until the very end. Surprisingly, in reality, the giants that could deflect the sword aura of the strongest swordsman in the empire could only be struck by the guy's sword. He begins to realize that if not for him, then ordinary soldiers would not have to stand on the front line. No one would have died in the beginning. The hero begins to take the blame, thinking that it was he who could save everyone, but he killed everyone. I no longer hope to hear at least some of the familiar voices. The guy falls to his knees and is immersed in his thoughts. Complete silence, you cannot even hear the rain, which has been going on for more than one day. But the silence is broken. Some kind of voice that is heard near the guy is trying to find at least someone alive. The guy from such words jumps up. Finally, there is hope. Can he really save at least someone? The poor stranger is so hurt that he can't even move. He begs for help. This voice is very familiar to the guy. He knows exactly who it is. Opening his eyes wide, the swordsman does not believe what he hears. Hearing hope, he understands that he needs to go to it. The stranger continues to try to find at least someone who could help. Using his sword as a cane, the swordsman begins to move towards the place where the voice is heard. He still does not believe that there is at least someone alive on this cruel one. Anyone who talks to him besides that giant. Each step is hard for the guy, but no matter what, he goes on. Despite the pain he feels. The pain that makes you want to fall and not move anymore. Finally, he got there, and sees in front of him a woman who lost her arm during a fierce battle. The guy is shocked by what he sees. He silently looks at her. In bewilderment, the guy breaks the silence and talks about how glad he is to see the commander-in-chief alive. She sits without moving, only blood and raindrops drip from her. Ade-shan, as soon as it is heard from her lips. The commander-in-chief is actually as strong a person as a swordsman. After having received so many wounds, she is still breathing. The guy collects his thoughts, looking at the commander-in-chief and finally begins to speak. As for the commander-in-chief, the woman does not look very good. And in fact, he is right, because she received many injuries, while losing her arm. She reciprocates, saying that he himself does not look very good. She also asks if he is a corporal by chance. Anyway, she interrupts and says that it is not very important now. She is interested in taking into account the giant. What about him? Is he dead? The swordsman pleases her with his words that he killed him. The giant's head lies nearby. Clear. Only this is difficult, and the commander-in-chief says. Still breathing heavily, the guy looks at her and does not believe that she is alive. He is dead. The commander-in-chief continues to speak a little more cheerfully. With tears in her eyes, she thanks Ronan for his valor and courage, for being able to defeat the giant. Ronan looks at her and doesn't say a word. Tears continue to roll down the eyes of the commander-in-chief. Rolling back the thought, the guy takes the opportunity and asks if she can then listen to the request, if she is so grateful to him. The woman looks at him in surprise, and asks what kind of request. Ronan continues to talk about what he cares about so much, which is the bodies of his colleagues. According to custom, they are thrown onto the battlefield or burned, but could they not be better taken care of this time? The woman replies that she herself is not sure, because Ronan understands that he looks better than her. Why not take care of them himself? The guy, as soon as he began to say something in contradiction, unexpectedly for himself and the woman, begins to cough heavily, without stopping, hiding behind his hand. After that, he stretches out his hand to the woman and shows the blood on his hand, with the words, "It is not yet clear which of us." Unfortunately, the swordsman can die literally at any moment. It is because of this that he wants all the fallen warriors to be well received. The guy continued his confession, saying that for most of his life he did nothing useful, so that he managed to do little. Somehow I can't even believe that such a strong person will die so easily. At this time, the woman is silent and listens to him without saying a word. But still she decided to ask if he survived, what would he like to do? The swordsman, with a smile on his face and barely breathing, says that he has many plans and that he would do many things. But, unfortunately, now only one thing comes to mind. The guy sits and looks at the sky, while every drop of rain hits him and rolls down. He would like to know what it is like to study at the academy. After all, he is a man who never got into it. The commander looks at him in surprise and asks what kind of academy. The guy continues to say that he was hurt by the words of the giant who taunted him. But actually, his older sister always. I wanted to send him to study at the academy, but, unfortunately, the guy himself understands that he does not have long left. He will soon be reunited with his family and will be able to say hello to everyone. Still barely breathing, he looks down at the ground. The commander tried to comfort him by saying that as soon as the rain stops, a search party will come and rescue them. And the guy is already skeptical, so he does not hope for salvation, because he is almost no longer a tenant. So why does she continue to give hope? The rain, which had been pouring until that time, began to subside as if from a bucket. The last droplets fell to the ground, they became less and less. And now the storm is over. The last drop fell, but it was louder than all the previous ones, after which there was silence. Both the swordsman and the commander opened their eyes very wide from misunderstanding. How could the rain end so suddenly? Is there still hope for salvation? Immediately after the storm ended, an earthquake began. So strong that it was even hard to sit still. Raising his eyes to the sky, the guy was in shock. What it is? His eyes were getting wider and wider every second. In front of them was a creature that had 8 wings. It radiated much more majesty than a Gaiet. The harbingers immediately followed. Hundreds of giants flew in the air. Hundreds of eyes watched the two of them. And each of them seems to want to destroy the two of them. The swordsman immediately jumped up and drew his sword, not understanding who they were or where they came from, but he knew he would fight them to the last. The commander-in-chief, with even more shock, cannot believe what she sees. Were those three giants, on which the whole army went, not the last? Really, at the cost of their own lives, they could not save the world for the third time. But this one was the most fatal. The commander-in-chief fell into her own thoughts. She thinks about how all this can be prevented after all. She had one last try, but how? Someone's scream interrupts all her thoughts. Each time they get louder and louder. Finally brought back to reality, the swordsman was able to shout at her. He asks her to come to her senses, because they still have a lot to do. He asks her to send him to the giants by telekinesis. From here, from the earth, he can't get them. The commander-in-chief, not understanding what he wants to do, asks a little screaming. "Do you want to fight like this?" That was all she said. The guy says, "Of course, yes, do not sit idly by, waiting for his death." In Ronan's eyes, only anger and determination. The guy is very serious. After all, even if he dies, he will definitely take a couple of these giants with him. The commander is at a loss from his actions. She admires his perseverance and fortitude, because fighting even in such a position is a very brave act. But she also understands that he is who he is, because only thanks to him, they were able to go so far and kill 3 giants. Winged creatures are also looking at them, as if they are waiting for something. A woman gathers her strength, breathing a little, she thinks about what is best to do. Finally making a decision, she turns to the corporal. Ronan turns around in bewilderment and says that they don't have time for empty talk. At the same second, something happens that makes the guy freeze, for the umpteenth time in a day. The commander-in-chief reaches out to him and kisses him. Ronan looks at her in disbelief, not understanding what is happening. Why in such a situation she decided to kiss him. Through the kiss, she sent something into the guy's mouth. What it is? The guy staggered back in even greater bewilderment and began to ask what it was now. The commander-in-chief starts to whisper something in her ear, but the guy can't make out a single word. He asks to repeat it, because he did not understand anything. She continues to speak, but still he cannot distinguish what exactly she wants to convey to him. The guy screams, not understanding what is happening. Why can't she just send him to those giants? Finally, she speaks to Ronan, and he can hear her. The woman says, what if they meet again? She asks him not to let her do stupid things and direct her to the path of a tailor. In the moment before him, she transforms into an ordinary tailor who looks at him and smiles. Behind them, the 8-winged giant began to explore another color. They are up to something and are going to act, while the corporal and the commander stand and talk. The woman continues to pour out her soul with a smile in her eyes, saying that this is her first time. The guy looks at her in surprise and is silent. He continues to listen to her. At this time, the giant is preparing an attack on them. He has in his hands a kind of core that emits lightning. Unfortunately, at the moment he throws lightning, everything turned blue around. The radiance covers the corporal and the commander-in-chief. Stardust is in the air. While the core is approaching, right on them, is this really the end? In the moment, everything goes into emptiness. White light. The boy's eyes got even wider. What just happened? Where is he? The sky has become more sunny, the clouds are not gray, but where is the commander-in-chief? At the moment, the guy jumps up from the green grass. He tries to find the woman with his eyes, but she is nowhere to be found. He sees only an empty field on which trees and grass grow. He understands that he has returned to his hometown, but how is that even possible? He sees children swimming on the beach. He still continues to touch the grass, not believing what he sees and feels. Guy takes deep breaths of fresh air. Yes, he definitely came to his hometown. The guy is in a misunderstanding and he has a lot of questions. For example, where did the commander-in-chief go, and all these giants? How did he return to the past? Having moved to the tree, Ronan decided to think about everything that had happened. He doesn't believe that the commander-in-chief's words turned out to be true. Will it really be possible to find her and correct the future? The guy plunges into memories. And again in front of him is that very moment with the kiss. At that very moment, the commander-in-chief passed something strange into Ronan's mouth. And finally, the woman's words became clearer in the guy's head. She gave him the sphere of going back in time. Ronan swallowed it and then went back in time. Ronan also remembers the next words the woman said. Thanks to this area, she was able to rise to the position of commander-in-chief, although she was a simple dressmaker. Just think, two completely different positions, and she was able to cope with them. According to the conditions, the sphere allows you to go back in time only 4 times. 4 times you can change the outcome of events in the future. She had already used 3 of them, so she only had 1 attempt left. She gave the sphere to Ronan because she saw him as a very strong and worthy person. She saw in him a man who had the power to kill giants. Remembering her words, the guy also remembers that she told him that he should improve his abilities, and she is glad that he wants this himself. She believes Ronan is the key to saving the world. Yes, she meant the words early when he said that he wanted to go to the academy. In fact, he was chatting about nothing. The commander-in-chief advised him to go to study at the Phil Leon Academy. There are a lot of smart and outstanding people in it, so studying there early will be beneficial. Finally she added. If they meet again, he would have to tell her not to do anything stupid and to remain a tailor. The last thing she managed to add was that she had done a lot of things, but this was her first time doing something like this. Having remembered everything, Ronan came to his senses. He finally remembered everything. He had a goal. One way or another, he does not believe that this is all true. For him, this is just a dream. He needs to wake up quickly. Passers-by around looked at him, not understanding what was happening. Why is some stranger hitting a tree? He is skeptical about this past, because even if this is not a dream, and he really returned to the past, what should he do here alone? Although he remembered something. If this is the past, then... The guy picked up a stick from the grass and stood up confidently. The same confidence that was with him when hundreds of giants were looking at him returned to him, but now a tree is looking at him like that. Finally gathering his thoughts, he took a step. And then another one, and finally he ran, because in fact, if he is truly in the past, then he can meet his older sister. Ronan runs through a crowd of people who have their own things to worry about. Everyone is going about their business, some of them are standing and talking carefree, someone is going shopping, and someone has already bought everything they need. But the guy is now happier than either of them, because a small amount of time separates him from meeting his sister. But something distracted him. Somewhere to the side, the screams of a child began to be heard. Who is this? On the field one could see a bunch of local hooligans who were mocking some poor man. The guy is dissatisfied with their actions. He definitely needs to do something about it. The poor boy was hung upside down. Unfortunately, these are still the same hooligans he remembered from childhood. But what? The guy froze in bewilderment and stared at the tree. In fact, the child was hung not by a rope, but by magic. He wondered why there were magicians in such a place. They are extremely valuable on the battlefield, as they are rarely seen. A light wind blows the leaves on the trees, they scatter and fly somewhere further. Some boy tries to calm down the local hooligans by saying that the one they were looking for was here. He thinks to himself when they will stop bullying the poor boy. If this continues, something very bad will definitely happen to him. The boy, through tears, begs them to stop. He didn't do anything wrong. He says that he has nothing to give them, that he himself has no money. Poor boy says that his mother's medicine has gone up in price this month. The bullies are not even going to listen to him, they continue to mock him, saying that they are not interested. The main one says that in reality he is just trying to rip off all the money from the poor man, he does not care about the health of his mother. The bully swings his hand and hits the boy in the face with all his might. Continuing to beat him, he says that if he wants to be a worthy son, then he must earn more. The other 3 bullies continue to mock as the poor boy is beaten. The head of the hooligans turns to the magician and begins to scream. He asks him to lift the boy higher, because he does not come to his senses. The guy simply froze at such a request. He began to contradict that there was no need to raise it higher, because he might accidentally drop it. Despite the warning, the bully continues to persuade the magician to do this, and especially not for him to hang. In a second, the hooligan's changed face seemed to go mad. He began to threaten, saying that he should immediately raise the poor man higher, otherwise the magician will be hanged next to him. The guy sobs at these words. Tears appear in his eyes. How could it come to this? Was his choice to learn magic really the wrong one? It just seemed to him that he had the power to do something good. You need to refuse the bully, the magician thought. Frozen with fear, the guy began to cry. He wants to do something good, but he is afraid of the consequences, because he understands what they can be. Biting his lip, he also realizes that he needs to overcome his fears. Collecting his thoughts, he interrupted the hooligans. He is about to deal a crushing blow to the entire gang. He can deal with them all. But unexpectedly for him, Ronan interrupts him. He hits the magician on the head with a stick, saying that he can kill him, let the boy go from the tree. At that moment, the magical spell weakens. The boy falls down and hits the ground. Not understanding what is happening, the bully turns around and starts screaming. What did this stranger even allow himself to do? Despite the fact that the stranger distracted Assel from completing her task, the bully decided to take it out on him. The boy immediately begins to apologize and say that he didn't do it on purpose. Ronan's voice comes from behind the boy. He tells him to ignore the bullies and turn around. Assel was shocked by what he saw. He met his old friend. Ronan at this time says that he needs to talk to someone. Most likely, he is hinting at the academy. At this time, behind him, the bully still continues to scream, without stopping. Ronan asks where Assel learned telekinesis. He answers that he studied from a booklet that he bought from a merchant. The guy is shocked how it was possible to learn magic from some cheap booklet. Ronan admires the boy, but it's still worth seeing what he can do. Behind Ronan and Assel, a painfully familiar sound is heard, almost even familiar. Ronan turns around and realizes that he was not mistaken. This is the sound of a sword. In front of him is a distraught boy who is ready to attack Ronan for ignoring him. His eyes are so crazy that it becomes scary looking into them. He says that he's definitely got something mixed up and that there's no point in making him angry now, because he just gave in a couple of days ago. Having finished his crazy monologue, he ran towards Ronan, saying that today he would put him in his place. Ronan was surprised that such a fool had a real sword. In an instant, the sword flashed past Ronan. He managed to jump away. In fact, of course, this bully can't even stand normally with a sword. Despite his ineptitude, he compensates for this with his strength, and that's just enough. Although, it's true, all this is not enough to defeat Ronan. In a moment he dodged, defending himself with his stick. The boy is shocked at how he was able to dodge such a blow. Ronan continues to taunt the boy who can barely hold the sword in his hands. Although he looks younger, the knowledge he gained from his time in the service has not gone away. Combat sense, it is still present near him. The bully, having missed, began to laugh, saying that Ronan was lucky, because he could have beaten him to such an extent that he could not even lift a spoon. Ronan says sarcastically that luck is on his side today. Although all his life he was haunted only by failure. It's unclear what the bully is up to, but he tells Ronan to get on his knees and beg for mercy. And then he will leave him alive. Seriously? The guy still talks with the same sarcasm about how scared he is. Continuing to taunt Ronan, the bully added that even if he killed him, he would take good care of his sister. The guy got very tense. How dare he talk about his sister? This confident bully started talking about what was on his mind when he saw her. About her shape. At that very second, the enraged Ronan, with one fell swoop, did something that this boy would not have done. Blood sprayed into the air. Scattering around, it began to flow down the boy. Ronan cut off the guy's ear in the blink of an eye. The ear hung in the air. Like everything around. Suddenly, a heavy metal sword fell to the floor. The bully began to scream and cry, holding his severed ear. He screamed so that literally every resident of the village heard him. His friends changed their faces instantly and realized that it was time to go home. The hooligan's agony was interrupted by Ronan. Appearing before the guy, he inspired fear and darkness with his appearance. The boy sat and watched without saying a word. The veins in his neck were bulging, and this time Ronan had a wild look in his eyes. What does this bully think he is? Does he want to die? All around were quiet. They couldn't even find words to describe what they were seeing right now. The rest of the hooligans are completely shocked that their leader just got crippled like that. And it's okay if it was an ordinary sword. But he did it, with an ordinary stick. Ronan interrupted their thoughts with the words, "Did they like the show?" They even whimpered in fear. Kicking the guy in the head with his foot, he told the rest of the hooligans to pick him up and get out, and don't even turn around. Just don't forget the main thing. Give all the money to the boy. Think of it as payment for ruining your mood. Of course, they did not argue with such a madman and agreed. Lowering their voices, they seemed to whisper that they would give everything. Ronan tossed a bag of coins to the boy. He stared at her in surprise. Is it all for him? In bewilderment, he asked Ronan if he was right. He did not mix anything up. There's a lot more here than the hooligans took from him. Ronan said that's right because he only needs a sword. He also made the boy happy with the words that these hooligans would no longer offend him. They simply do not have the courage to walk around this area. With tears in his eyes, the boy began to thank Ronan. The very innocence Ronan began to say that it was just a trifle, so let him go home with peace of mind. But Assel interrupted them both. Blushing slightly, he stared at the floor. The boy began to apologize almost with tears in his eyes. According to him, it was clear that he sincerely apologizes to the boy he was holding. He understood that it was impossible to listen to this hooligan. Ronan knew not to do that, even when threatened to be beaten up. Unable to restrain himself, Asel began to cry, saying that he was very scared. He couldn't stop himself. Sobbing, he continued to say that it was all his fault and that he was really sorry. The boy stood there and did not even know what to say. A second later, his face changed from incomprehension to a smile, and he added that he was crying too. How and when Hans first dragged him here? Ashley's eyes widened. Ronan did not interrupt their dialogue, he only listened to what they were saying. And the guy kept talking. As soon as he saw Asel, he immediately thought that they bully him just like they bully him. Asel froze. The boy put his hand on Asel's shoulder and told him not to blame himself, because he understands him. Smiling widely, the boy added again that it was not his fault. But, one way or another, he appreciates Asel's apologies. Ronan is still listening to them calmly. Finally saying goodbye, the boy went to get medicine for his mother. And Ronan and Asel were left alone, waving after the boy. Ronan looked at Asel and thought about something. Ronan noticed the beauty of the boy. His red hair and purple eyes. Smiling, he thought that Asel was not bad. Ronan also broke the silence with the words that he needed to talk to Asel. The guy jumped in surprise, and confirmed the words with a nod. Ronan was delighted and said that then they would see each other in 4 days. The guy was surprised, why exactly 4 days? Following Ronan, the guy shouted what he meant and why it was so late. Ronan said that he was busy right now, so they would postpone the conversation until later. See you when the moon rises. Also adding some positivity, Ronan hinted at what will happen to Asel if he doesn't come. The boy who jumped up again. And finally, Ronan ran on about his business. And Asel remained in place. Eyes wide open, the boy looked at the distant Ronan, who was further and further away with every second. Finally, the guy ran to where he originally ran. There was a house in front of him. Standing in front of the door, he wondered if it was worth it. Does it make sense to come in now with flowers? But somehow, he remembers that his sister loved them, so he picked everything he saw along the way. Without collecting his thoughts, he decided that this was a bad idea and decided to throw them away. But a voice came from the house. She came out on the threshold. She kept thinking who was screaming here. Ronan froze from his native words, did not know what to do, he could not even turn around. Behind him, his sister stood in the doorway. And now he was able to turn to look at her. While Ronan was in the penal battalion, he often thought, what should he say when he met his sister? Should he apologize for leaving her without saying a word, or should he just say he missed her? These thoughts never left Ronan. But, unfortunately, all these words were just words that only Ronan from the penal battalion could say. On the threshold stood a lovely girl in an apron. She exuded warmth and comfort. She is very happy to see Ronan so early. Without taking his eyes off her, he couldn't find the words. And finally, he was able to utter at least one word. I'm home. That's all he said, looking at his sister. Entering the house, he was shocked by the laid table. Lots of fresh and tasty food. Ronan seemed to be in heaven. Irel happily accepted the flowers that her brother brought her. She is glad that even such a callous person as he was able to collect a bouquet of flowers. She literally squealed with happiness, holding a bouquet in her hands. Ronan was surprised. But in fact, he is glad that his sister liked the flowers. You can also notice the care and kindness of Ronan's sister. He literally tried everything twice, and she offered him more supplements. The guy decided to ask his sister how old she turned this year. She said in bewilderment that she was 22, and in general, why all of a sudden such questions? But really, he just forgot. The sister screamed, saying that such a thing should not be forgotten. The sister, thinking that he had caught a cold, began to ask if everything was fine with him. Ronan at this time was lost in his thoughts, and began to think that if then Iroh was 22 years old, then, before the arrival of those giants, there were about 10 years left. Putting her hand on Ronan's head, Iroh began to take his temperature. But he didn't have a fever. Iroh breathed a sigh of relief. Ronan looks at his sister and is touched. She's still the same as the last time they met. Just as bright and kind. Ronan can't take his eyes off her. He wants this moment to last forever, he wants to feel the warmth of her hands and care. But he understands that in 10 years he will have to protect his sister and the world. He takes her hand and interrupts her. His sister is surprised. What does he want to say? With a smile on his face, Ronan says he wants to go to the academy. My sister froze at those words. To the academy? In a second, her mood changes and in her voice she screams admiringly whether he is telling her the truth. With tears in her eyes, she asks if she didn't hear it right. Ronan, a little surprised, says she didn't hear her. And thinks we're so much happiness in her eyes. Ronan never listened to her when she talked about studying. In a moment, she ran after something. The boy looked at her in surprise. Iroh started digging through her things, saying that she knew this day would come, because in fact she thinks Ronan is smart, which is why he will succeed. A little embarrassed, the guy thanked his sister for the kind words. She immediately took out a cauldron and placed it in front of Ronan. The guy took a deep breath. Iroh was preparing a present for Ronan for that day. And finally, he arrived. They both looked inside the cauldron. The guy was in shock. How did his sister manage to accumulate so much in secret? She wanted to be able to pay for Ronan if he changed his mind about the academy. The guy looked at this amount of money in bewilderment and wondered. When did she get so much? One way or another, Ronan refused them with the words that he would still not have enough of them. But he is very grateful to his sister for such support. At those words, my sister jumped. How is that not enough? She began to talk about how it seemed to him that they would not be enough. In fact, there was more money there than it might seem at first glance, so Ronan could enter any academy. Ronan interrupts her and says that he wants to go to an imperial school, Philion Academy. The sister turned pale at these words. She screamed so loudly that even the birds around her flew away. Imperial School. Philion Academy. The best among all educational institutions of the empire. The best teachers from all over the continent teach here. The academy has huge funding from the imperial family itself. This place provides the best education possible. This imperial school has an incredibly high status. It was literally nicknamed the Hero Factory. Commander-in-Chief Adeshan studied here. And the Swordmaster Shulafen. Even the worst of bandits, the Winter Witch and others. During the war that was, each of the students of Philion showed himself very well. They were so helpful that it becomes clear why Adeshan recommended her. It's night outside and only the moon lights the way. Ronan was on his way. He is attuned to the academy, but he understands its problems. He understands that the problem is her popularity, her huge tuition fees and high standards. Well. Iroh's reaction was promising, of course, but never mind. Somehow, she believes in Ronan. Finally, he arrived at the meeting point. He has a fighting spirit. He is confident that he can prove to his sister that he can. And the guy really came to the meeting place. He did not neglect the words of Ronan, although, most likely, he simply appreciates life. Ronan is a little mistaken in calling the boy Missile. The guy interrupts him and quietly says that his name is not Missile, but Assel. Assel is a little scared by what Ronan said, and he asks to forget about those threats. He just jokes. Throwing off his backpack, Ronan says that they have a lot to do. But first he will test Assel. The guy is confused. Test. Anyway, Ronan has already put down his backpack and is ready to tell his plan further. Opening her eyes wide, Assel asks what Ronan is talking about. He interrupts him and with a smile on his face says that nothing of the sort. Assel just needs to use telekinesis on him. Ronan is serious, and judging by his eyes, he is not joking. He asks to lift it as high as possible. Assel still stands and does not move. Use telekinesis? Why is Ronan doing this? And why so suddenly? Trying to understand why all this is, he tries to dissuade him, because Ronan could get hurt. Regardless, the guy says it's not that dangerous, so let him do what he says. Assel looks at Ronan a little embarrassed and skeptical, but still agrees. The boy begins to conjure. Enchantment begins to manifest from his hands. Having shouted a spell, Assel directs the spell on Ronan. He, in turn, simply froze, seeing all this. Wow! That was all Ronan said. Soaring into the air, he thought that Assel is much better than he originally thought. Being dozens of meters from the ground, Ronan smiled. He likes to be in the air and watch the city from above. Well, of course, the height and stability are not the same as they were then, near a Gaiet, but in general it is similar to what he felt then. Specially trained magicians are no match for the average self-taught, but somehow this feeling of flying made him realize that. It was precisely telekinesis that allowed him to fight on equal terms with the giants. In fact, telekinesis is a rare ability for magicians, not to mention that magicians themselves are extremely rare. So Ronan has big plans for this kid. Assel will definitely become the main part of the battle with a Gaiet. Smiling broadly, Ronan says that in fact, everything is not very bad, but there is something to strive for. His stream of thoughts is interrupted by the words of Assel, already tired of the witchcraft. It becomes difficult for him to keep Ronan in the air. He asks if he can let go of Ronan already, and Ronan, still smiling, asks him to be patient a little more. The guy wants to check something else, but suddenly he will go down himself. Assel looks at him in surprise, not understanding how he was going to go down himself, but he obeys. Ronan raises his sword to the stars and makes a quick and strong swing of the sword. The magician stands and does not understand that in general only what happened. Ronan literally cut Assel's mana and landed on the ground. Not understanding what happened, he tries to understand what Ronan just did. Ronan brushes off the dust and says nothing of the sort happened. This is just an acrobatic trick that he learned a long time ago. Assel continues to scream and ask what other acrobatic trick Ronan just did. Why did he? At that moment, Ronan hit Assel in the head so that he would not ask too many unnecessary questions. He doesn't even know how he did it. One of his tasks is just to understand what kind of ability it is. Ronan hides his sword and Assel scratches his head. Ronan thinks that it was thanks to this ability that the sword worked on the giant. But okay, anyway, now they have more important things to do. Ronan also adds that in any case, Assel passed the test. The guy takes a backpack in his hands. and passes it to Assel, saying to follow him. They have business before sunrise. Assel does not understand a little what Ronan wants from him. What can you do so late at night? Smiling, Ronan says. This case can become the first page in the greatest historical book of the Empire. Biography of Ronan. The moonlight still illuminates the entire path. Our guys are on their way. Assel asks Ronan if they are going to Philion Academy, right? Already tired guy asks if he heard. Do they go to an academy where only the elite of the Empire study? Him and Ronan? Ronan screams a little, says that he heard everything correctly, why ask again? It's annoying. The guy looks at Assel and asks if he doesn't want to go there. But really, that's not the point. Assel is a little skeptical that he can get into this academy, because Ronan, for example, has a talent in martial arts, but he can't do anything. He is cowardly and shy. Ronan interrupts him and asks if he also wants to continue living. Assel opened his eyes wide, listening attentively to Ronan. And he went on to say that he wasted his innate talent in order to amuse a bunch of hooligans. Does he really want such a life? Assel froze at such words. Ronan did not stop there, he continued to talk about the fact that Assel actually has many bad sides. Yes, he is a crybaby and ready to burst into tears from any little thing. A loser to boot. Every word hurt Assel right in the heart. But Ronan paused. But all this can be fixed. And at that moment, Assel looked at Ronan more vividly. Also, the past cannot be changed. Ronan's face changed as he said all this. He is sure that, one day, Assel will also remember him and regret him. Just like Ronan, who every day thinks about what he did and what he didn't do. In his past life, he could have done a lot differently, and the last war would not have been the last. Returning to reality, moving away from his monologue a little, Ronan hit Assel on the shoulder, saying if he changed his mind. Assel opened his eyes wide and was embarrassed. Does anyone really care about him that much? He couldn't find words. While Assel was flying in the clouds, Ronan continued to say that he would not force him to do something, this is Assel's life, and he was ordered to decide its outcome, so if he wants, let him return home. But Ronan turned around and walked on towards his goal. Assel asked him to wait, he wants to change. Listening to how Assel wants to go to Philion and learn everything he needs, Ronan smiled as if he knew that after his monologue, Assel would change his mind. He noticed Assel's masculinity, but they still have to deal with Assel's obstacles. Is he ready? Of course, Assel agrees, he carefully listens to Ronan's instructions, and he, smiling, when suddenly the maniac shouts that Assel got caught. On the floor. They listened to the crackling of firewood and watched the flames. Assel saw this, turned pale. Is this accurate? His first hurdle? Ronan nods in response. This is the best opponent in order to show Assel's skills. In front of them is a moon goblin. A creature with big teeth and ears, and bones around it. So it turns out that this is also the leader of a group of goblins that is sleeping. Ronan radiates happiness and fun, telling and showing them, and Assel literally radiates fear and darkness. And this is the first obstacle that needs to be destroyed? Once again, like a maniac, Ronan looks at Assel and asks. Let's go. Moon goblins are actually quite common in this area. So it's not surprising that Assel and Ronan met them. Most people tell them apart from regular goblins by their yellow skin and mutilated bodies. But their real specialty lies not in this, but in the fact that they adore treasures and gold. They love to ambush and steal valuables from merchants. They kill anyone who gets in their way. After that, they gather in one place and collect all the loot. They also like to organize holidays around their treasures. All night, under the moon, they dance. Just the same, today is the full moon and this is one of their favorite days, because it is today that they celebrate. Asel asks in a little bewilderment, hinting that they are really going to rob them. Ronan confirms his words with a nod. Again, a little distraught, Ronan says that today, they will steal all the goblin gold. Asel is surprised that goblins steal treasures and celebrate their victory in such a place. Never heard of this. Asel, in the same bewilderment, asks how Ronan found out about them. Ronan says he has his own sources. Ronan hugs Asel and continues to say that all that needs to be done is just to transfer their treasures to the backpack using telekinesis, but the main thing is not to wake them up. The guy thinks that it will be easy for Asel, but Asel doubts, saying that in fact it is not so easy, he can make a mistake and wake them up. Deciding to dilute the atmosphere, Ronan says that if this happens, then things will be bad for them. Frightened, Asel begins to say that it is too dangerous, they need to think about their actions. Ronan says he's a coward. Anyway, he adds, they only need two things to get into Philion. Of course, the first is money. Need to pull the insane cost of training. And the second is experience. Money, of course, is a problem, but experience is much more important than how you will show yourself. Ronan talks about how the academy is full of aristocrats who have been trained since birth. So if they really want to win these guys, there's only one way. And this is, to gain experience by risking your life. Ronan thinks that the goblins are the perfect opponents, as they will gain both money and experience in combat. Kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. Asel is quiet. Ronan asks if he has any better ideas. With tears in his eyes, he says no. Almost jumping up, Ronan says that then everything is decided. They start right now. Asel is very skeptical about what they will do. So, the full moon. It illuminates everything in its path, and the goblins at this time are already resting. And finally, gold flies into a backpack, there, like coins, necklaces, and bracelets. Asel is going well, because he has almost collected a full backpack of gold at a fast pace. A little tired, he still continues to drag the goblin treasure. Ronan guides him and tells him what to do. And now, the last treasures fly into the backpack. Asel releases the gold and in a moment it all falls into the backpack. Happy as a child, Ronan looks at all the gold they have in their backpack. Finally, they collected everything. The last backpack was full. They completely stuffed 2 backpacks with gold. Now they are ready to go to the academy. And in fact, it was not so difficult, the main thing was experience. Asel looks at the backpacks a little in shock and agrees with the guy. Looking at Asel, Ronan thinks that to be honest, he was not sure that everything would work out, but Asel is a quick learner. Stroking his head, he realizes that he is much better than he thought. With an insane smile, Ronan thinks that he has found himself a wonderful servant, and Asel laughs awkwardly at this moment. So, since they have finished their business here and stuffed their backpacks to the brim, then it's time to hit the road. Asel happily looks at Ronan and says, "Is it true that they finished everything?" He agrees because they have already done everything they need, so it's time to get out of this place. You need to run before the goblins notice the loss. And here, some bird in the moonlight rushes very quickly. 2 hunters are chasing after her. Even tired, they continue to run after the bird. But she certainly has a lot more advantages than them. These two are screaming so loudly that even Assel and Ronan heard them and fell silent in bewilderment. Who are they? Ronan is confused because who is causing such a commotion in the middle of the night? And then the worst happened. It is not surprising that the goblins woke up from such screams. With the first thing, the head checked the chest and realized that there was nothing there. In bewilderment, running up to the chest, he checked the chest again. It didn't seem to him. It really is empty. The head of the goblins did not like it. He woke everyone up saying that they had been robbed. Almost immediately, the goblins jumped up and began to listen to the chapter. At that moment, they heard a noise behind them and turned around. A very good picture is seen before them, because they saw the thieves. Unfortunately for Ronan and Assel, this is not a very happy situation. The guys are shocked. Immediately, all the goblins went berserk and ran to Assel, who froze in fear, and Ronan, who thought. Assel was so frightened that he even fell on the grass. And Ronan, throwing off his backpack, says that he knew it. Something must have happened, because everything cannot go so easily. Assel offers to drop everything and run away, but at that moment he already draws his sword. He won't go anywhere. After all, one way or another, they still have a goal to pay for their education. But looking at how the crazed goblins are running at them, this does not seem to be something important now. The goblins are about to attack them, but Ronan is busy with something more important. He examines his sword, realizing that it is made of cheap steel, and also thinks. Is it enough for 15 hits? In fact, there are about 30 of them, and they are already jumping on Ronan and Assel. One of them stretches its claws to attack. Assel sits in bewilderment and does not understand what Ronan expects. The goblin is about to attack him. At this time, he is still calculating how to quickly deal with the goblins. Sharply drawing his sword, he points it at the goblins. In a moment, 3 heads fly off their shoulders. Ronan is a very strong swordsman. He has nothing to do with some goblins. And now the heads hung in the air, blood scatter around, the rest of the goblins stand in bewilderment. Assel, seeing such a picture, also does not lag behind the goblins. It's unbelievable that even such a cheap and fragile sword in Ronan's hands could do such a thing. And now, there are 14 strokes left. If you have watched up to this point, then I am very grateful to you, because this is where the video ends. If it's not difficult for you, then like this video and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to continue this story, then write in the comments. Thank you all, I love you all.